I have decided that there are enough new people listening who need to learn these principles of giving. I will not go into another year with new people coming and with some of the ones that have been taught developing lax habits, thinking that somehow the principles of first fruits should not be applied, should not be grabbed and taken and seized, and the promises that accompany. And I think maybe it was a little bit of a wake-up call in my conversation with the pastor I referred to last week, to realize that it's not enough to say something once. The benefit of having things repeated is the denning in process. That is, eventually something is going to sink in. And the reality is that this ministry has gone through a lot of changes over the last few years. I can tell you because I used to be in the office in the mid and late 90s and processed the mail in those days. Now, granted, we probably had 2, maybe 3 times as many people participating. I'm not just talking about the ministry body as in the people, bodies in the church, but around the world, everywhere participating, maybe 2 or 3 times more. But first fruits was a principle taught that essentially did multiple things, teaching a principle, the most important, teaching a principle, putting God first. Secondarily, I can tell you because I was there through a few of these strange years where, the beginning of the year after people have done their Christmas shopping and whatever gift giving they've done, they get to January and February and suddenly giving goes down. That's been a pattern. I have been here, I think, almost 20 years. So I've seen it enough to know that's the pattern. My concern is not so much for a decrease in giving as it is a decrease in the understanding of your spiritual responsibility. The two things go hand in hand. When the people are being led, that is, I've taught that word, coming under, stoichein, coming under like those in rank and file, under or being led by the Spirit in that way, they are following principles. They order their life accordingly. But there are many people, because it's not being reinforced, they slip back. Now, I haven't devoted a message to first fruits in probably years. I haven't devoted a whole message on giving in such a long time because there's giving playing on the network. But it dawns on me that we also have a hodgepodge of people. We have some people that tune in that are so delighted to listen to all the teaching. Some tune in to listen to some of the teaching, and some don't even tune in during the week. And if they do, it's sporadic and random. So we're playing first fruits until I can really get a gestalt here that everybody has had their minds refreshed. Their memories are now jarred of what their one-time response was to the Word of God. And hopefully, I will bring some of the new people alongside. Part of my desire, focusing with the emphasis on first fruit, is to get everybody kind of up to speed. We have way too many people that listen, that don't realize they have a responsibility year-round. If you are feeding at this spiritual table, you should be paying where you get your spiritual food. Now, I want to go back to this conversation for a second with this other pastor because it's not unique. I've had another 2 or 3 conversations, if I think about it, over the last 6 months with other pastors. Now, there are things I don't walk around saying, hey, people are calling me. I'm very quiet, most of the time very discreet about people coming and asking counsel of me, because I always think, well, why would they ask it of me? The problem begins with people's spiritual disconnect from the topic of giving. Now, there's one other ministry that buys airtime, just one other ministry. Most, I would say, 75% of what they say regarding the raising of money is this ministry is supported by your tithes and offerings. And I'm okay with saying that, because that's a perfectly true statement. The other 25% of the time, they engage in what I call that real slippery slope. You know, we'll send you so many CDs for a gift of so much. Well, public broadcasting does that. Why do people professing to be led by the Spirit and by the power of God need to engage in the very thing that other people, heathen or not, engage in? Why is that necessary? Well, we have to pay for our airtime. We have these expenses. We have this to do. Well, let me just say this. In the history of this ministry, or at least since I've been around, but I do know it's prior to my coming here, we've bought airtime and never made back the money. The most ridiculous proposition one could ever think. Go into a city, we still buy airtime here, which for the few times we're on is quite costly. And I've said, if the Lord will provide, I'll go on more stations, I'll buy more time. We will find places. If the Lord will provide, that means that God has to quicken, and it's like all these things that line up. But we've never gone on TV and then said, well, we'll only stay on if there's a return. We think about how much money, let's just talk tithes and offerings. You'd have to take in how many people would have to be watching. And even if you were on in a primetime slot where you had lots of people watching, and even let's just go one step further, on a religious station that's on multiple satellites with a multiple reach, most of those people do not pay tithes and offerings to a television ministry. They bring it to where they go and attend the church. That's just the way it is. That's how people do it. Unfortunately, it's actually not really the right way if you're learning from wherever you're watching. And we're not talking about a one-hit wonder like the person who said, oh, I'm reading a book, so I don't think I should come to church because I'm learning from this book. What are you, an idiot? I read books all the time. Should that mean that I should never step to the pulpit and open my mouth? What type of lunacy is that? We're talking about the denning in, the repetition, that which sinks in finally and takes root. Now, we've never, at least not in my time, engaged in the folly. That is, if you'll do this, we'll send you that, or we'll do this for you. No. One time, Dr. Scott was trying to get people into the church. One time, maybe in a period of 2 or 3 weeks. And I know because we just went over this in some legal conundrum with somebody who was trying to say, Dr. Scott gave stuff away. He said, you have to come here, because he was getting tired of the empty seats, and he said, if you'll come, you'll get a free whatever it was. That was to get people in the building. He did that actually on a few occasions, and it was never to give things away per se. It was to get people into the building, which ultimately he figured out real quick. Just like Jesus giving out the free food, the people will come. But, after that free food is over, where are they? Then work. It's a great idea. Give away something, people come in the door. I may be the only person, and I don't like to say that because that sounds like some megalomania, but I really may be the only person crazy enough to say this. If God is not doing the work in you, I don't want to do it for him, and I certainly don't want to imitate it. I lived a lifetime of imitating the world, following along with trends, doing things that everybody else is doing just to fit in. I don't want to fit in. And I don't really want you to fit in, quite frankly. I want you to fit in with God. I want you to be part of the family of God. And part of that is understanding, I don't think we'll completely ever escape traditions, even the most purest of people in terms of their following the Bible are going to engage in some type of tradition. It's inevitable. Inevitable. But by degrees, I would say, to try and stay as true to something as possible. If God is not doing this work, if He has not placed His Spirit in you, if He has not stirred your soul, if the awakening has not occurred inside of you, oh my goodness, I am a new creature in Christ. I do belong to Him. I'm not my own. I have been translated from darkness, from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of His dear Son. I have a purpose. There's a reason for me being here, and it's not the reason I thought at the beginning, but He's got a greater purpose for me. Just think of all this. If God's not doing that, I sure as hell don't want to do it for you, and I don't want to imitate it, because it means, as much as I can say this, it sounds like a cruel thing to say, but I'll be just as hell-bound as you will. Do you understand what I'm saying? To manipulate, to lead people for some other purpose other than to teach a principle. And I'm perfectly fine with teaching, call it an umbrella principle, as long as it's not being caricatured. Now, somebody probably a year or two ago asked me why I don't teach on certain subjects that Dr. Scott taught on, and I'm not going to name them. I'm just going to be very generic. And I said, because I have a difficulty with people over the years who I've seen manipulate and twist the very thing he was saying. Because some people just didn't really listen enough, or listen to the full, or they listened like they wanted to, the things they desired to hear, and not the whole sum total. I think at least in the last 7, 8, maybe 9 years, I've not even touched the passage of Malachi. The prove me now herewith, not because I don't believe in the passage, and not because I don't believe in the tithing principle, or not because I don't believe that men and women will not rob God, because they will. The book of Malachi says they were offering up whatever they could to rob God. And we're just the same way. If we can find ways to get around doing something, that's the sheep nature. That's the tendency to revert back to the old way and the old nature of no one will know, or I'll do the least amount. That's why when people start out giving, they're extremely legalist if they're taught on tithing about what is the least amount they have to give. You'll find them counting down to the 1/10 of a penny, because in their mind it's the least, not calculating, if it was me and you said to me, what do I have to give? I'd say 10%. Well, then round it up to the nearest whatever it is, God's way. Like, somebody standing there saying, well, I think it comes out to some percentage of a cent. Really? Those people usually have a problem with giving. I think once, it's almost like a pump where you have to prime the pump and then the water begins to flow out of it. Once God, not the pastor, not someone to coerce you, once God has placed His Spirit in you and that pump has begun to be primed, and there is a pressure, not pressure as in you must do, but a pressure flowing from God through you. That's the byproduct. That's the desire. That's not, let me count down to the 1/10 of a penny, just to be sure I get it right. Now, this is an important period for us. It's an important period for this ministry. While everybody else is focused on Christmas and New Year's and whatever else, this ministry is focused on first fruits. I want to make sure that everybody understands this is, it's like saying this is how I'll start the year. When you say I put God first, there's putting God first and calling and making your reservation. Not waiting until Friday, but doing it first thing either after church or on Monday. That's putting God first. Putting God first is whatever comes into your hands, saying this portion belongs to the Lord, and making sure that that's where it goes. And I can't think of a more important concept, if you're going to look at the bigger picture, than putting God first at the beginning of the year. We're dealing with our calendar, I know. That's the calendar we deal with. But I can't think of anything more important than setting a precedent that says, no matter what else happens, this is what I'm going to do as my first act of the year. While people are busy making resolutions that they will not keep, and you know they don't. You know you have, and I have, and you don't, and I don't. At least I'm honest enough to say it. But this one thing you do. And what is gleaned out of this one thing? And I really believe this. It's a principle that is applied to the tithe. It's a principle that's applied to first fruits. It's a principle that is universal. You put God first, He'll take care of the rest. I don't even want to talk about angels going before you. I think that's like an added blessing. You put God first, He'll take care of the rest. That cannot be, sorry friends, if you're listening and you're relatively new to this ministry, that cannot be apprehended by an unregenerated, that is not regenerated by God's Spirit, individual. The carnal mind rejects that. I was just reading a message from somebody whose husband uttered the words, "There is no God." My Bible says only the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. It's a perfect accident that just happened randomly. And you somehow are just a random accident. I think it might have been yesterday, last night. I was driving late at night, coming back home from something I was doing in the afternoon. And strange thoughts were going through my mind. I was thinking, how amazing that I ended up here. How incredible. You'd think after a while you get tired of telling God how amazing this is. How amazing that I ended up here. How gracious is God to have brought me to Dr. Scott's side and to hear him, and then to be, I'm not saying I readily accepted the position, but how gracious is the Lord to have done all this for me, and for what I don't know, but I know one thing, I've put Him first. I've put Him first. Now, I may do things rather faultily and imperfectly, but He takes care. He's taken care of me, and He's taken care of this ministry because I've put Him first. There's no other way this ministry could have survived. Some might say, oh, it's luck, or, where they're just barely hanging on by a thread. Well, let me tell you something. If the Lord will grant me the desires of my heart, I've been praying earnestly that we need to bust out. We need to be doing things to get the message out there. And yes, can God bring people to us? Absolutely. There's people all the time. I was just reading this, found you by accident, found you by accident, Yucaipa. I found you by accident, so glad I did. I've been coming to Sunday service from Yucaipa for the past few weeks. People can, can be found by accident. God knows there's people out there and how to bring them in, but there's also the other method, which is getting the message out. And the Lord knows my desire is to put the message out there. Now, this is not, well, that takes money, so I'm asking you to do this. I'm telling you that's your responsibility. I have to trust the Lord will make a way, not only for finances, the Lord has to open up a door for us to have a venue, a platform, an outlet that goes somewhere. I've said many times, we used to be on satellite, and you can say we're beaming out to the world, but if there's no catcher's mitt on the other end to pull down the signal, you really are beaming, you're covering the world, but no one can receive you. That was a very big problem. When I met Dr. Scott and I started to get involved, we were looking at footprints, specifically the footprints over England and India, English-speaking countries, where we could, and I used the pictorial image from the analog signal that we had, using another middle point to have what I called catcher's mitts, receivers in these different places to cover footprints when we were on analog, which we never had. You can beam out on a satellite, but if people don't know where to look, you have random people stopping, and the short coverage, if you will, over the United States of the satellites we had been on, well, you had to know or you had to stumble upon it. Far different from something that is designed to receive the signal and distribute it into people's homes, almost like a force that you turn on your TV, you're going to see it. If you have a certain provider, you're going to see it. And we tried to work that out. But prior to that, we were we were beaming and covering the world, but really the practical point of this is it has to be pulled down, and it wasn't being pulled down. Now, I'd like to be able to say the internet's going to do that. The World Wide Web, that's great. But I'd like to explore other avenues. The Lord has to open a door. I've been praying for that. I don't care if it's a smaller door. It doesn't have to be a big door. Just open a door. But the Lord has to do that. It doesn't mean I sit back and I just wait. I have to be looking, I have to be praying, I have to be asking. And the combination of multiple things working, at some point, God's going to probably go, okay, enough already, over here. So this isn't, you have to do this in order for me to do that. I've operated by faith. I've operated by the principles of putting God first. And when you put God first, He takes care of the rest. Now, He has brought us, myself and you, this ministry, very far when many people said, it can't last. I told you yesterday in my message, the problem with those people is looking to the pastor instead of looking to the master. And the master is well able to provide. He makes a way where there is no way. I love what the Colossian letter talks about, that He must have preeminence in all things. Now, I don't know if those are cheap words to some or they're just simply words on paper, but for me, they represent a principle. They represent a principle that is summed up in Firstfruits. It's summed up in the tithes that people give. It's summed up in a mindset. If that mindset, let's put aside money for a minute, if that mindset permeated the church world, the Christian church, Christendom, the Christian church would be a strong army of people. But I've said many times it's weak and impotent. And why? Because Christ is not preeminent in all things. He doesn't have preeminence in all things. The church has become a place where we graft in what pleases us, what is designed to attract the multitude. Somebody said, oh, have you seen the church that's downtown? And they have, it's a worldwide ministry, and they've got an outlet downtown. And I happened to tune in one night on TV, going by the channels, and I was appalled. I wasn't appalled at, it wasn't like the message was offensive. But for me as an individual who desires to keep learning and constantly grow, I do not want to be yelled at. I don't want to be talked to as if, I'm some idiot that is so imbecilic, that I'm so low in my understanding that I need someone to tell me what 1 + 1 is. I'm not saying that everybody is at a certain level spiritually or academically or in their understanding, but please don't insult my intelligence. And this is what's permeated the church. Now, in their mind, perhaps Christ has preeminence. They're doing it their way. I'm interested in doing it God's way. And when I say that, I said no one's immune from traditions. No one can escape them. We all eventually develop something. But as close as I can stick to God and His Word, that's what I intend to do. And I intend to do it with intent. I said, if God's not in this thing, I'm more hell-bound than you are. Now, I know God's in this thing, and God is doing. He does the drawing. He does the ordering of your steps. He does the blessing of all things. I talk to people and they say, Lord, bless you mightily, and I bless you. And, well, you can bless on me all you want. That's like sneezing on me. Only God can pour out a blessing on me. And the blessing, let me put it in the plural, the blessings I've received have not been financial. The blessings I've received have been spiritual, enriching growth that I could never put a price on. And the fact that I walk around with an awareness of an eternal, what Dr. Scott, borrowing from the poet, used to call the hound of heaven, is very important to me. I never want to be without that. Maybe that keeps me honest before the Lord. But what I'm saying to you is I will not let you fall into a slack and complacent mode that thinks somehow, because I'm not constantly talking about this thing called giving, God's way, that it's not important to me. It is intrinsically inseparable. You cannot take it apart. You cannot separate it from the very heart and core of Christianity. Now, I'm going to refer back to the text I used in my message. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And from that I shall not want, that word cheser, as a verb, to lack, need, be lacking, decrease, to cause to lack, to fail, to diminish, to disappear, to retire, to be inferior, to be worthless, to be diminished. If I was reading, and I unfortunately didn't bring the notes that I had, one of the translations, I believe it's the Ethiopic translation of this passage. I'm sorry, it might be the Amharic, but whatever, the Giz, the Ethiopic, let's keep it generic, of this Psalm 23:1, for I shall not want, in the inclusion of the description of the word to want as to be in lack, need, desire, it also talks about, interestingly enough, from that same word. And don't read into what I'm saying, but the word also contains to sin or to fall short. And I thought, well, I'm constantly falling short, so I can't make that a promise to claim, but I can understand the principle that in Him I have all the guidance I need. So even from the Ethiopic perspective, the want and the lack are not limited to, but the provision included in the psalm, place of rest, restoration of soul, being led in paths of righteousness, even this, which is always taken out of context, walking through the valley of the shadow of death. It doesn't say, though I die. We walk through a valley of the shadow of death all of our life long. It is shadowing over us all of our lives. He is with us. For thou art with me. Rod and staff, the provision that is here. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. It means I will not lack, and I will be fed and taken care of in spite of what others may think or what others may do to me in His presence. So the provision that I'm talking about, and I just used this psalm because it's a very convenient one, very fresh in my mind as I've been reading over it several times today, is to say, you put the Lord first. The Lord will take care of you. Now, somewhere else in the Psalms it says, I've never seen the righteous begging bread. Well, I've seen people who I would sum up as closest to God with the most need. And interestingly enough, those who are the closest to God, if you will, in that way, because they have the most need, are the ones that are constantly asking Him for the provision to make it through. And in that respect, I've never seen the righteous begging bread or forsaken. God is faithful. If you want to take it out of the New Testament, there's something that God cannot do in the New Testament. You know what He cannot do? It says that God cannot lie about the promises that He's given. The promises that He's given, He doesn't lie about. Now, we can talk about our inability to stay the course, but God, with the promises that He's given, God cannot lie. Now, there are many things that we can fudge on, but when God says He's promised something, so that's why I urge you to go back, listen to the rest of the teaching that's going to play regarding the promises attached to first fruits, and don't commit to something and say, well, I'm doing it because of the promises. Do it because you're putting Him first and recognizing His ownership and exercising your stewardship. And secondarily, what is, we'll call it the spillover and the benefit that comes from that. I'm not crazy when I say that I can find abundant scripture that talks about not forgetting God's benefits. Psalm 103 is one of them. 6 things it says about what God does. Now, you can take what I've said and apply it to the rest of the teaching and recognize something. You make quite a statement before Him. It's not necessarily, you can talk about a statement of attendance and filling a seat, which I hope you get those reservations up. That's a testimony to the onlooking world when they look in and they see a full house. That's an encouragement to me. But the things you do in your giving, that is between you and the Lord. That is a testimony that you make that's never going to be advertised or publicized. It's not going to be up on a wall. It's not going to be, hey, this person was the star of the church because they gave the most. But God sees and God knows, just like God's Son, Jesus, looking and watching the woman casting in what we refer to commonly as the widow's mite. Interestingly enough, He was watching this all unfold as He watches our stewardship, as we unfold in our daily lives, how we come about, how we approach, how we give thanks, and how we recognize the goodness. I look back at this year that's almost come to a close, and I think, the Lord has been so kind to me, so gracious. I think about the fact that for a woman who lived through her husband being diagnosed with cancer and never thought in a million years I would hear a doctor say that to me. From my doctor's quick actions, and I know the Lord put all those people in my pathway, to the care that I'm receiving as people are watching over me on a regular basis to ensure that I stay healthy and well, to accomplish what I need to do in my time that the Lord gives to me in my stewardship. I think about that grace and it makes me just shake my head and think, incredible that God would do that. Now, I can't say that I deserve it, but I know one thing. I've put Him first, and He's taken care of me. I can say for this ministry, we're not busting out at the seams. We're not sitting on gold bullion, but whatever we have, it's because the Lord has made a way. And I know it's because we've put God first. Not man's ways, not tricks, not trinkets, not deception, but purely God's Spirit working in and through you and through me. And whatever the onlooking world or the people who tune in to ridicule or the naysayers say, I don't care. I care about the eternal purposes being accomplished and worked out in you to glorify Him. That's my constant care, concern, and prayer. Now, I'll be looking forward to seeing the reservations climb and many of you calling in new commitments to participate in Firstfruits. So we'll see if the message has been dinned in a little bit more. Right now, I need you to get on the telephone.